back to the afternoon session. It turns out it's a bit of a Brazilian theme, as both our presenters are from Brazil. I don't know if that was planned, but should be good. So Jean Machado is a systems and safety engineer with a master's degree on thermal and aeronautical engineering. He has more than 15 years of experience working in the aerospace industry in the development of new programs and program support. He's currently at Cranfield Aerospace Solutions, where he's trying to grow and lead a systems and safety team. Over to John.
Thank you. I would like to thank Nkosi for the opportunity too. Unfortunately, my co-workers will not be here today. They are actually the ones that did the work. I'm just here to take the glory. So, as he mentioned, we are building the system engineering team at Cranfield, and that understood that would be a good opportunity for them to develop, to also prepare the paper on what they are doing at Cranfield. So, okay, to start, I will start with the introduction of the project Fresson. I will explain about some of the regulatory context that we have to apply for this project. And then I will talk about the system development process that we introduced to define the functional location, the methodology, and the results we get from this process. And in the end, I'll have the conclusion that defines what we are learning from this process and what should be our next steps. So, Cranfield, it's a company that has more than 30 years and has been designing and certifying modifications to aircraft. Now, it's moving to driving the concept for new designs and capabilities to deliver zero-emission hydrogen electric aircraft. And we will start this process, this long journey, with the conversion of a conventional 9-seat British normal airliner to hydrogen electric propulsion. So you also now are growing our capability to expand this propulsion system we apply in other applications like dronomics. It's one of the partners we have. So the project Fresson, the idea is to modify one side of the aircraft, the existing British normal, with the fuel cell propulsion system. So the left side, you continue the same, no change, the conventional engine. And on the right side, we're going to introduce the hydrogen fuel cell system, the electric propulsion unit. The hydrogen fuel tanks are inside the cabin. And we're going to replace the propeller with that 3-bladed propeller instead of 2 on the original one. And we also have the heat exchangers below nacelle here. So there's a lot of challenges for this project. There are the usual ones like mass. It's always a challenge. These new systems are heavier than the ones that were moving from the aircraft. One of the big challenges for this application is the thermal management. The fuel cell propulsion efficiency is similar to piston engine, but the problem is that it rejects heat with a small temperature difference between the coolant and the ambient temperature. The drag will be a challenge too, because we have these new heat exchangers below the nacelle that will add a lot of drag to the aircraft. Packaging, it's very challenging because it's a small nacelle, and we are adding the whole system basically there. I mean, for the second phase that we will have the certified product, the only difference is that the tanks will not be inside the fuselage, they will be in the wings. But everything else, it's on the nacelle. One question we have is about the system responsiveness to step inputs. So it needs to be rapid response because it needs a pilot immediate demand for it. So when we have in takeoff or go around, it needs to respond really fast. And this is one of the biggest challenges is for safety. Yeah, we're introducing new hazards in the aircraft. The hydrogen will have concerns about fire and explosion. We are also working with high voltage, up to 850 volts. So this is a concern for the authorities, what we can do to minimize these hazards that we are introducing with this new technology. But the most challenging is not actually in this list here. It's that we are now developing a system engineering culture in the company. And that's what really challenged because it could be easy for us to understand the system thinking, but for someone that is not used to it, to be able to understand the process and the importance of this system thinking to develop the aircraft, it's really difficult. And I was part of that. I mean, at the beginning of my career, when I started at Embraer, 2007, it was the first time that Embraer was applying the ARP 4754 on their development. So I was part of the team that introduced this process to Embraer. So I know how hard it is. And sometimes it's difficult to the upper management to understand that, okay, if you want to do the same things, this to work, it needs a lot of investment. It's not easy. I remember that when we were doing the budget for this new Embraer project, we are just saying, okay, we have the requirements for the equipment. We just need to create some requirements for the system in the aircraft. So it should not take so many hours. 100 hours per system should be fine, and everything will work. Now, right, and even now it's difficult because they think that, okay, it should be easy to write a requirement, but write a correct and complete requirement is really difficult, if not impossible, to have a complete set of requirements. So that's the real challenge we have, to implement this culture in the company and to spread this to all the design teams to understand the importance of this. And because without the help of the other teams, we'll not be able to do this. It's not just the system team and the safety team that will be able to do this work. We need the help of all the other teams. So talking more specifically about this case study, the idea is to get the FCPS, the propulsion system, that consists of the hydrogen fuel cell, the electric propulsion unit that have the electric motor and the motor control, and define the functions for these new systems, because we understand that it's really important to define these functions because it has an implication in safety. As we can see here, there are many causes that could lead to a fire or explosion, like hydrogen leak, high temperature, high voltage, or high inlet or outlet pressure. And we have sensors in place to detect these threats, like the hydrogen leak sensors, the temperature sensors, the voltage monitoring, and pressure sensors. And we will have the control system to process the information and provide inputs to the pilot to do a manual shutdown, or it will out-shut down the system. But the problem is that everything relies on this control system. So if this is not working, we will lose all protections we have, or most of the protections. Now, the regulatory context, it is still a challenge for us because the authorities still did not define what are the requirements for the hydrogen systems. What we are doing right now is to based on what they defined for the electric aviation, to define what should be the requirements for hydrogen systems, and that's really difficult. But we can see that one of the concerns is about the development assurance. And we can mitigate the failures or using the fault tree analysis to define the failure modes and see the reliability of the system, or based on the development assurance, avoid errors in the system. And we do this process using starting with the function design assurance level and then defining the item design assurance level. For a particular case, the authorities does not have function level defined. We just have on the AC 13.1309, 23.1309, the requirements for the item. So there's no mention for the function levels here. So what we do is we adapt the ARP 4754 that we use for the bigger aircrafts, the Part 25 aircrafts, to define what should be the function levels for our case. So the ARP 4754, it's discussed the development of the aircraft systems, and it will take into account the aircraft operation and environment and functions. And it includes the validation and verification of the design for certification and product assurance. This picture here describes the interaction we have with the ARP 4754, that's for the development process, and the ARP 4761, the safety guidelines that we use. So here we will define the functions, and then we will validate these functions with the safety process, defining the criticality for each one of these functions. And then we fold out these functions to the systems and identify the IDAL for each equipment. If it's a software, then we need to follow the DO 178. If it's a hardware, then we follow the DO 254. That's what we use on the aerospace. And this is the development process that we use. As I mentioned, we will have the aircraft functions. Then we perform the FHA to define the criticality for each one of these functions. Once we have the criticality, then we perform the safety analysis to validate the architecture we have and then allocate these aircraft functions to the systems. Once we do that, we repeat this process for the system. We will then perform the SFHA to define the criticality for each one of the system functions. We then perform the system safety analysis to validate the system architecture and allocate the functions to the items. It's there when we start to do the hardware and software design based on the standards that I mentioned, the DO 178 and DO 254. That's the part of the validation. Now, once the suppliers verify their design and provide us the data, we will then perform the system analysis and the aircraft safety analysis to confirm the validation, to confirm the implementation of the requirements defined on the validation phase. Now, the problem is that although the functional location it's a key task in this process, the RP 4754 will not describe how to do this functional location. And we understand that it's basically because there was no agreement to do that, or there's multiple ways to define the functional location. So the work here was to apply the system thinking and define a structural process to perform this functional location. And for that, we use the function-based system engineering. And the objective is to create a functional architecture for each system, product, and process that can be designed and provide the foundation for defining the system architecture through the allocation of functions and sub-functions to hardware, software, database, facilities, and operations. So when we started, we have the level 1, that will be the aircraft functions. And each design team, they define it as the system function, subsystem function for level 3. But the problem is that there was no fall down from the aircraft to the system. It goes directly from the aircraft to the subsystem. And each one of the subsystems had defined their functions based on their own knowledge. I mean, there was no process to define these functions. So that's the work that we had to do. We started with the aircraft functions. We did the flow down to the systems. And then we also evaluate the subsystems, mainly the EPU and the HFCS, because these are the new ones, the ones that we will be concerned. And then we will be able to define the functions needed to perform the safety analysis. So, as I mentioned, we started with the system functions, identifying the system functions derived from the aircraft level. We then reviewed the system architecture to clarify these system functions. We defined the system boundaries and context to identify the internal and the external interfaces. We then decomposed these system functions into subsystem functions and allocate the subsystem functions to subsystem requirements. And we restarted this process doing alternative decompositions until we have the one that's best suited for us. And I apologize for does not be able to provide much information about the system functions on how it works, because this is proprietary information, so we are not able to share much about it. But I just give some highlights on what we did. So starting with the system functions derived from the aircraft, we would have the list of functions here, and then allocate these functions for each one of our systems. The propulsion system, the fuel system, the communication control system, and legacy systems, the ones that we did not change on the baseline aircraft. And then we come up with the list of functions for the propulsion system. These are the ones that we derived from the aircraft. And we have the additional ones not derived from the aircraft. That would be the energy conversion and energy distribution. Once we define these functions, we then review the system architecture to clarify these functions. For example, initially, we have derived the provide directional control function for the aircraft to the propulsion system. But during our discussions, we understood that this is not a direct function for the propulsion system. So we moved this one. But as I mentioned previously, we included the provide energy conversion, provide energy distribution, and as one of the biggest challenges we have, it's about the thermal management, we included the provide thermal management function to the system. The next step was to review the system boundaries and the context to identify the internal and external interfaces. So this is something that was missing on the initial study when we we started this case studies that each system worked in their own box. They did not interact with the other ones to identify the interface functions. So this is the one that took us more time to define these boundaries and the interfaces for then specify the system, the functions allocated to this interface. Then the next step was to decompose the system functions into the subsystems, the HFCS and EPU. So we then again started with the proportion system. We allocate these proportion system functions to each one of the subsystems. And then based on the equipment for each one of the subsystems, we allocated to see if each equipment has their function and if you're not missing a function without equipment. At the last step, we then allocate the system functions to subsystem requirements. And the idea is, again, to do this check to see if you have a function with at least one requirement allocated to it, and if you have requirements which at least one function derived from it. In this case, we found that there was a lot of HFCS requirements that were removed because there was no function for these requirements. I mean, the requirements were actually at that lower level at the equipment function instead of the subsystem function. So that's why these ones we remove from the specification. And then in the case of the EPU, there was not so many requirements without functions, but there was a handful of requirements that were removed because they were redundant. We found that because some of the functions defined previously were redundant, some of the requirements were redundant too. So we removed this redundancy from the EPU. So on the first interaction, we found that there was 79% of the EPU functions allocated to requirements and 45% for the HFCS. And then we have functions, 10% of the functions not allocated on the EPU, 13% on the HFCS, and we then found that there was non-functional requirements, 9% for the EPU, 10% for the HFCS, and unnecessary requirements, 2% for the EPU, the redundant ones, and as I mentioned, for the HFCS, there's 32% of requirements that we consider that was unnecessary. For the subsystem level, they will be necessary for the equipment, but not for our subsystem specification. And then on the second interaction, we are able to allocate 100% of the requirements, functions to at least one requirement. So what we have learned with this process? We started to implement this system thinking and principle to the company, because the idea was to start with the system team, but we then shared all this information with the other teams. We discussed with the design team to explain, for example, why the HFCS should not define the requirements for the equipment. We should not keep it at the subsystem level. And the idea was to improve the specification because this is just the first step for us. We have a long journey. We need to be prepared for the next phase to be better than we are at now. So we also was able to understand and manage the complexity and uncertainty of systems, because it should be simple for most of us, but when the engineers started to think about the functions, the team, they understood that it's actually difficult and complex to identify these functions. It's not something that they were used to do. Without the process, they will not be able to do it right. And we also set guidelines to apply a structured process to design, develop, integrate, validate, verify, and maintain the system. And we ensure that the system meets the stakeholder needs and expectations, as well as the functional, operational, and safety requirements. Some of the requirements, too, we found out that were because the engineer understood that it was better for the equipment or for the system, but was not actually a stakeholder requirement. So we said, okay, it could be beneficial for the system, but if it's not a stakeholder requirement, we should not go there. I mean, we should constrain ourselves to what is required to us. Now, as the next steps, we have to work on the airworthiness and certification. And this needs a collaborative effort to define the certification requirements. As I mentioned, right now, there's no certification requirements for the hydrogen system. We are participating in the working groups with SAE, AeroCai to define these requirements, and the authorities participate too, but right now, it is still no definition on the requirements, the certification requirements we need to comply. And that's a concern because we will start to develop the system and define the system now, and this regulation won't be available at the best 2 years from now. Other thing that we need to work, it's about the supplier management, because we need to help the suppliers, because they are not most of them are not from the aerospace background. Most of them are from the automotive industry. They use a different standards. For this phase it is okay, we can work with that, but for the next phase, they will need to comply with the aerospace standards. If not, we will not be able to certify the aircraft. And in the end, we need to improve our internal process too. As I mentioned, there's some gaps. This one was one of them, the process to define the functional location. And we need to address new methods. We need to come up with new methods for these new technologies. We know that the ARP 4754 and the ARP 4761, they are both under review, and we should have a new version soon. But we need to be prepared for it. We know what is coming, so we need to start to develop this new process, new methods, based on what is coming in these new standard versions. And that's all for me. You guys have any questions?
Questions over here to start?
Pawan Kumar, 3S Knowledge. Thank you for your presentation. That was very interesting. What I'm keen to know is that how would you manage with the interface problems? Because with functions comes with the interface as well. How did you manage that along with the functions?
Well, one of the things that we had to create, it's an integration group. So, because as I mentioned at the beginning, each subsystem was working on their own box, but there was nobody to see the overall system. So we created this role in our company to work with the integration. And of course, there's challenges on that too, but we then did workshops with the suppliers to be able to understand this interface and be capable to manage these requirements, especially, for example, during the startup process, when one box will be waiting to receive power from the EPU controller will be waiting to receive high voltage from the HFCS, and the HFCS will take some time to provide this voltage to the EPU. It could be that during this time, the EPU controller will flag a fault and we will not be able to start. So we will be in an end loop. So this is the things that we did. We started to, as we did on this exercise, we identified the interfaces. We started to control these interface requirements, and we built an integration team to work only with this intent to manage the interfaces.
Okay, over here next. Keep your hand up and I'll come back to you.
Thank you very much. My name's Peter Douglas. I'm from Synoptics. Very good presentation. Thank you very much for that. Did you consider using MBSE as part of this approach? Because some of what was mentioned here about structure allocation, functions, decomposition, interfaces, allocation to requirements, is MBSE perfect for that?
Well, myself, I started at the company in February. Before that, there was no system engineering. There was a system engineering team there, but there was no process. There was, we had to grow the team. Understand that MBSE, it's our goal for the future, but we need to start first with the basics, because we will not be able to do a project with MBSE without the help of all design teams, because just the system team will not be able to do that. So it's key for us to implement MBSE, but something that we need to develop. It's a long journey, as I mentioned. We need to develop that with time. Myself, for example, I'm more on starting with the MBSA, because I see a lot of errors when we are doing the full tree. If you give the FMEA and the system description for each one of the engineers, each engineer will come up with a different full tree with different results. So if we implement the MBSA, then at least we know that we will have a consistent output from it. So it's part of our plan to go to MBSE, but first we need to grow the team to be able to go there.
Thank you very much.
Mark Ashforth from the MOD. Just a simple question, really. I was a bit surprised that you chose as your concept demonstrator a twin-engine aeroplane. That would seem to add to the complexity to start with.
Well, to be honest, initially, the idea was to change both sides. I was not in the company when they did that decision to move to only one side, but their thinking is that they want to design a system that will be able to be applicable very soon. So if we start with the single engine aircraft, the market for them is not enough to compensate the investment that we need to do to develop the system. So that's why because we need to have the market too. That's why they decided to go to the two-engine aircraft, because they see a market that's profitable and will then be able to certify an application that will give us what we need.
Good afternoon. Tom Ash from Jacobs. Follow on really from Peter's question. What resonated to me was that you weren't starting from a blank sheet of paper, so you had to deal with you had a brownfield site of the requirements, and almost the challenge is, as you say, making the best of the situation you've inherited. So if you could just explain a little bit of the communications battle with established engineering design teams and, you say, the other stakeholders in the company to impose that rigor on them, to move them to a function-based system which they didn't have previously, and some of those people challenges.
Yeah, as I said, I was part of the Embraer when they started to adopt the system, so the ERP process on their programs. So I know how hard it is to have the people to understand the importance of this. And that's why on our approach, we're starting giving the teams in the engineers in the system team to the knowledge that they need to then spread out this knowledge to the other systems. So that's why we allocated one system engineer for each technology, and then they would have multiple conversations with the design team to then trying to show them how to design the system, because at this point where we are, we will not be able to change what we have done. So what we are doing is to explain then, to try to define the process that we will need to apply for the next phase. And again, it's a challenge because it takes time. We need to, as I mentioned here, the idea to do this paper was also to show to the company what they were doing and how they would be able to help us to define the better system. So spread this culture of system engineering in the company, it's as I mentioned, the most challenging thing for us. And this is just come with time. I mean, we need to, we do training with the design team, but it's not just one time. We need to repeatedly do this training from time to time. We need to help them with this specification because they don't have this system thinking yet. So we need to select some of the examples that they are doing and show to them, okay, you see this requirement here. There's a problem with this requirement for this and this. So we do like trainings on how to write good requirements, but we need to insist and try to give more examples to the design team for them to understand the need for this system engineering in their design. But it's really challenging. I don't have the goal to have everybody knowing system engineering by end of this year or end of next year. I know that you just come up with time based on my experience too. So if you have the recipe, if you know how to do it faster, but in the end, what I'm saying is that there's not something new that we are doing. We are just doing what we can to improve the system knowledge in the company.
Okay, any more questions?
Hi, Tim Breakspear, WAE. Having worked in aerospace and now working in automotive, getting automotive companies to come up to aerospace standards is a challenge. I'm assuming you're going to have to, well, what are your thoughts on having to expand system engineering in your own company, as well as helping develop and train those organisations to hit aerospace challenges?
I mean, it's really difficult because even the authorities does not know how to do it, because right now, if you are an engine supplier, you need to have your own certification. You have your regulations, you need to comply with that. But it will be the same for the electric motor that we are using here. It will be the same for the fuel cell. It seems that it will. So the suppliers will need to be a design organization. They will need to comply with their specific set of regulations besides the one that we have for the aircraft. So it's something that will take time. Nobody here is expecting the suppliers to be able to do this in 2 or 3 years. It takes some time. So what we do is to, for now, we are performing the audits in the suppliers. We are identifying their process, and we identify the gaps they have, and we show them how they could improve their process. It's only because if they are not doing the process that they should do, we will not be able to fly the aircraft. So one of the things, for example, that we need to explain to them is about the regression analysis and how important it is. Okay, you did a test, you get a result from this test. If you change your equipment, the configuration, then you need to do the regression analysis to see, okay, what are the tests that I need to repeat? Because with this change, the results will not be the same. So this is difficult because the suppliers will think that we are just trying to, we are asking to change just because we like. It's not like that, but it takes time. So what in my view, we will have some of suppliers from the automotive sector, but we will need to select only a few and be most reliant on the aerospace companies right now, because, okay, there are aerospace companies that do the electrical motor that we need. So we can restringe ourselves to, okay, but is there any aerospace company that provides a fuel cell? No. So we need to restringe ourselves to what we cannot get from the aerospace and try to improve our suppliers to then they move from the automotive sector to aerospace sector, but it takes time to do that.
Hi, Ed Brandley from Kinetic. You said the authority, CA or EASA, have they got hydrogen fuel cells on their sort of roadmap? Are they going to produce a CSH, for example? Is it in their vision, or are they just waiting for you to make mistakes?
No. First, you'll not be able to certify anything if you don't have the special condition in place. So it doesn't matter how long the authorities takes to do that, we are not certifying any aircraft without that in place. We understand the authorities' concern, and we are working with them, as I mentioned, these working groups, to try to help them on showing that we can provide a safe and reliable system. But to be honest, nobody knows yet what will be the answer for this question. It could be that we will need to increase, like for Part 23, the minimum requirement for a catastrophic or hazardous failure condition. It's an IDAL C if you have multiple functions. Perhaps the authority will say that, okay, in that particular case, if it's a hydrogen fuel cell, it needs to be at least IDAL B, or we need to follow the RP 4754. There are other things that they could do to improve the safety without perhaps working with the specific risks. We know that for now we have requirements saying that, for example, a catastrophic event should not have a single failure. Okay, that's fine, we comply with that. But what happens when we have dormant failures on our system? 2 dormant failures. We could be 1 failure away from a catastrophic event, and we don't know. So perhaps it's something that they will improve and say, okay, if you are working with this technology and you have a dormant failure in your system, the probability of this dormant failure could not be higher than X. And in this way, you'll be improving the safety standards that we have now, and the authorities would be more happy with the designs that we are doing now. Yeah, but it will take it will take time to have an agreement, but we are not be able to certify anything without at least a special conditions for the authorities.
Thank you, John.
Thank you.